to the entertainment Talking Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video as free agency is seemingly complete. So now I'm going to start to focus a lot of attention on the NFL draft. Of course, the New York Giants could certainly make a small signing here and there. And if they do, I'll make a video on it and I'll certainly talk about it. But I want to get onto the draft. I want to start evaluating some positions of need for the New York Giants. And one of those positions is the wide receiver. Is it an immediate need, in my opinion? No. I think we have much more pressing needs, whether it be the linebacker, offensive line, maybe an edge rusher, things like that. But it's certainly something that in the very near future, the New York Giants will have to address. Golden Tate's getting up there in age. Sterling Shepard has had concussion problems. We'll have to wait and see if Evan Ingram's in the long-term plans, even though he's at tight end. And Darius Slayton certainly showed some promise. But I think they could use a tall wide receiver, specifically with this offense that they're trying to implement with Jason Garrett. I expect more vertical passing plays, and I think it calls for a tall wide receiver. After all, of all the impact wide receivers on this roster, the tallest one is Slayton, who's 6'1". Golden Tate and Shepard are about 5'10". They're both, kind of like slot guys. They need somebody who could go up and catch the 50-50 ball and be a threat in the red zone. And we talk about that all the time. Now, me personally, I do not want to address this need no earlier than the back end of the third round pick at the very earliest. I'm thinking the third or the fourth round area, maybe the fifth round area is where the New York Giants should target that wide receiver. But I wanted to go over in this video if they decide to go in the second, because they're definitely not going in the first. If they decide to go in the third, fourth, or fifth, which types of wide receivers they could target based on those rounds. So let's jump right into it. Let's start with the first wide receiver. Now, there were two guys that I brought up in this video that I'm going to talk about that I think the Giants could potentially target in the second round. The Giants, of course, picked 36th overall, and these are the only two guys that I would even entertain taking in the second round. It would have to be somebody that most people feel is a first-round talent that would fall to us. Would I want to take one there? Me, personally, no. I would still want to go with a guy like Bourne. I would still want to go with possibly a center or something else like that, or a tackle if we went with Simmons in the first round. But if the Giants were to go with a wide receiver, these are two guys I could potentially see them targeting realistically if they were to fall to us in that area. And another option that the Giants could have that we talk about a lot is the ability to potentially trade down and maybe accumulate an extra second-round pick, which would make these players more realistic. But the first guy I want to talk about was T. Higgins. T. Higgins, of course, out of Clemson, a very tall wide receiver, fits exactly what the New York Giants have expressed in the offseason, what they're looking for to fit this system. You go back, you look at every wide receiver they've interviewed, Higgins being one of them, they've all been like 6'2" or taller. The Giants are certainly targeting a tall wide receiver. Higgins would fit the bill. He did not perform at the Combine, but he did have a pro day in which I think he ran a 4.4. I've seen pro comparisons to A.J. Green. They say he's got great body skills. He can go up and catch the ball, and he's very athletic. In terms of production at Clemson, he was very productive. He caught 25 combined touchdowns in his last 2 years. He had the same amount of receptions, 59 each year, with Trevor Lawrence throwing footballs over there at Clemson. But definitely took off his last 2 years there, and most people have him graded out as a first-round talent. But because the wide receiver is such a deep position this year, it is looking more and more increasingly likely that he could be there in the second round for the New York Giants. Like I said, this would not be my option. I'm not going wide receiver, but he could potentially be an option for the Giants in the second round. The other guy that could be a potential option for the New York Giants in the second round, and you're starting to see him be mocked more and more into the back end of the first. He had a very impressive combine. Another guy that would fit exactly what the Giants are looking for in terms of height, 6'3", a guy that can go up and catch the ball, be a red zone target, and really be a nice future piece opposite Darius Slayton, hopefully for the next 5, 6, 7 years at the position, would be Denzel Mims. And this is the only other guy that I could see the New York Giants potentially considering that's on my list. Guys that are tall, guys that could go up and catch the ball, which is what I think they're looking for. Will the Giants draft these two individuals? Probably not. Like I said, I think they're going to try to address more pressing needs, but these are two realistic possibilities. In terms of what Mims did at the Combine and why his stock has soared, I mean, he was unbelievable. He had a 4.38 40 time with a 38.5 vertical leap. He had a 131 broad jump. He was a 6.66 on the three-cone drill, which is very impressive, and a 4.43 20-yard shuttle, which is why you're starting to see him soar up draft charts. And in terms of production, well, at Baylor, not quite as productive as Higgins in terms of the touchdowns, but he still had 12 this year and 28 over his last 3 seasons combined, well, at Baylor, eclipsing 1,000 yards 2 out of the last 3 seasons. So definitely a guy that has some production, a guy that really showed out at the combine. And when you watch film on this guy and you listen to what people say about him, he is a complete receiver, good route runner, does a little bit of everything. He's not unbelievable in any one category, but a very well-rounded wide receiver that fits exactly what the New York Giants are looking for in terms of height. Next guy we're going to look at is a guy that I feel is a much more realistic option if he were to fall to the Giants there at that comp pick at 99. Willie, I don't know. He could definitely go into the mid to late second round, but it's possible. I've seen in some mocks he falls into the back end of the third. So I wanted to talk about Michael Pittman. And Michael Pittman, when I read about him, a lot of things people have to say. Very sure-handed wide receiver. Well, the New York Giants drafted a very sure-handed wide receiver, I think in the third round. It might have been the fourth, Steve Smith. A number of years ago. And Steve Smith, of course, contributed to a Super Bowl for the New York Giants, was a very good wide receiver. And I believe he still holds the catch record all time in a single season for a New York Giant wide receiver. Well, you're looking at a similar receiver in that aspect. He only dropped 5 balls his entire time while at USC. So, maybe it was 5 catchable balls, but regardless, that is his MO. He's a very sure-handed wide receiver. He's tall. He's 6'3". He's a guy that I could see the New York Giants definitely targeting if he were to fall to that comp pick area at 99. And you look at his production. Last year, he really took off. He had 101 catches for USC for 1,275 yards and 11 touchdowns. In terms of the combine, not quite as fast as the other two, which is probably why a lot of people don't have him going quite as high. As opposed to Mims, who participated, he had a 38.5 vertical. Pittman had a 36.5. The broad jump wasn't quite as high. The 3-cone drill wasn't quite as high, and the 40 time was at 4.52, which is still respectable, but just not blazing speed. But he's he's a very sure-handed wide receiver and a guy that you definitely want to keep your eyes open if the Giants are looking to take one there in the back end of the third. Next guy we'll talk about is Chase Claypool. And a lot of people have, I've seen him go in the second round. He definitely could. I personally would not take him in the second. Could the Giants? Sure. I mean, this guy's an athletic freak for a man of his size. Very reminiscent of Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram, of course, a tight end. Going into the combine, a lot of people were not sure if Claypool was going to be a tight end or a wide receiver at the NFL level, and there still may be some teams who may look to convert him to the tight end. And if they view him as a tight end, he may actually go higher because he'd be by far the best tight end in this year's class. But from what I'm reading, he wants to be, he wants to be a wide receiver at the NFL level and definitely has the speed and the height to do so. Some people think he's a little bit more of a project. He is big, though, and he is fast, and he really impressed at the combine. He stands at 6'4", 238 pounds, near identical to that of Evan Ingram. And his 40 time was very similar to Evan Ingram when he participated at the combine. A 4.42 for a guy who weighs almost 240 pounds. Very impressive with a 40.5-inch vertical leap. And he did a 126 on the broad jump. So he definitely helped his draft stock. Do I think he'll be there at 99? Probably not. Do I think the Giants would take him in the second? Probably not. But a guy you want to keep your eye on, and who knows, maybe he does fall on draft night. And then in terms of his production, another guy that had a really good senior year. Just over 1,000 yards. He caught 13 touchdowns. And I remember watching him at the Senior Bowl. The guy is definitely a red zone target and the exact type of receiver that the New York Giants could be looking for. Next guy we'll talk about is a very popular man amongst New York Giants fans, as is Claypool, and that is Antonio Gandy-Golden. As a matter of fact, one of my subscribers, Stephen Evans, has talked about him now for months, and along with a lot of, numerous other subscribers of mine. Fourth round, I think, is a good area where they could potentially grab him at 99 or in the fourth round. A guy that the New York Giants may very well have on their radar. I think they talked to him, if I'm not mistaken, at the Senior Bowl. 6'4", 223 pounds. Played for Liberty, a smaller school. So there's the first question mark. Didn't play the same level of competition, which is why he may drop. He also didn't have the most impressive 40 time. He's not electric. We'll get into those numbers right now. And only played for 2 years at Liberty. Ran a 4.6 40, so a little bit slower than that of Pittman. And he did a 36 on the vertical jump, 127 on the broad, 7.33 on the 3-cone drill. So not the most electric combine. A guy that a lot of people still say needs to work on his route running, but he's tall. He could go up and catch the 50-50. And again, like everyone else I've said on this list, is a guy in the red zone target. And his production has been off the charts. But like I said, lesser competition at Liberty. But almost had 1,400 yards this year and has a combined 20 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons. So Antonio Gandy-Golden, another man that the New York Giants could have on their radar later in the draft. And then finally, another guy I wanted to go over real quick was Isaiah Hodgins. Isaiah Hodgins is another interesting prospect for the Beavers out of Oregon State. standing at 6'4" yet again. A little less in terms of the weight department, 209 pounds. But again, tall wide receiver with production. Had a fairly decent combine, very similar to that of Golden. If you look at his vertical jump and 40 time, they're almost identical. I think Golden was 36.5. Gandy Golden was 36.5 as well, and ran a 4.640. So very similar times there, very similar builds. Gandy Golden's got him by about 15 pounds, but they're both 6'4". And I think all these guys would represent that vertical threat for the New York Giants. They all have different strengths. They all have different weaknesses. And obviously some would go higher than others. But I just want to do a quick rundown of potential wide receivers that I could see the New York Giants potentially targeting in this year's draft based on round. Hodgins is a guy maybe you could get in the 5th, and maybe Gandy Golden as well. But those are definitely some guys to keep an eye on draft night, and we'll see who the New York Giants do select at that position. I expect them to draft a wide receiver, and I think it'll be between rounds 3 and 5. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.